Okay, we're going to be going over the head and crown and the ears and how that all interacts and what the different terms mean and what the judges might be seeing that you're not seeing, specifically in Holland Lops. We're going to start off with just the standard of perfection, what it calls for, and then obviously dive more into like the article. The Breed Club, my book is falling apart, don't judge me. So we're going to start with the points. So the head, ears, and crown alone gives 42 of the 100 points. And 42 of the rest of the points go to the body and bone. So we have a 50 split between the head and the ears. The rest is allotted to fur, colors, markings, conditioning, like the stuff Arba calls for in terms of coat. But in terms of what's like the actual physical structure of the rabbit, it's a 50-50 split between the head and the ears, between the head and the body. And for the general type, we have 84 in total on general type, and that's very unique to this breed. I don't know of any other breed that gives 50% to the head and 50% to the body, obviously, again, for general type, not for the whole thing. And there are some photos in the standard that go over head and ear, specifically just what it should look like, but it doesn't really tell you why it looks the way it does. For the ears, there's 10 points on ears, there's only 8 points on crown, which I find a bit funny because I think if the crown is correct, the ears will be correct, but very rarely is it the other way around. In fact, I cannot see ears being the correct shape without the crown being correct. So the ears, we have 10 points. The ears should hang close to the cheeks from a strongly defined and properly positioned crown. The ears should be thick, wide, and well-rounded at the tip and well-furred. They should be in the position just behind the eyes. Length of the ear should be equal or slightly longer than the jawline. You will see a lot of rabbits do really, really well where the ears do not end at the jawline. They're shorter, and that is because of the shape. Judges tend to favor that. It does not mean it's correct, but that is something that does occur. Ears should be balanced with the size of the head. That's a given. Everything is about balance. You can get a rabbit through. You can get a rabbit granted that has a lot of pieces that should not work, but because there is balance, it works. So the faults would be thin ears, narrow, folded, pointed, folded, improperly furred, or poorly furred ear length, which does not balance with the size of the head. So especially if you have a buck, like right now I'm waiting on a buck who's exactly 6 months. I think today's the 6-month turnover. And he has long ears, but that's because he has an underdeveloped head. So now in 2 years, those ears are going to be the perfect length, but for now I just have to keep him in a cage. And then we get 8 points to the crown. The crown should be strongly defined, which is the ridge where it begins. You'll see it on a well-defined crown. This little ridge right here. That. Which appears to sit on the top of the head and add to its massive appearance. Something I really enjoyed as an example for what a crown should be compared to is a headband. How a headband sits on the head. And we're going to get into that when we have the visuals here. The crown determines ear placement, ear control, and size of ear opening. That's very important. It does not determine the shape, it does not determine the length, but it really determines a lot about how the ear appears because it controls the ear opening and the ear placement. I think longer ears that sit well in the face look shorter. The crown should be evaluated from side to side, width wrapping from the top of the head down to just behind the top of the eyes. This is why it looks like a headband, resulting in no space between the ears and the eyes when viewed from the side. The width of the crown to the front should be allowed. The width of the crown from the front to back should allow the ear to be fully open. That is also very important, is ear openness, and we'll get onto that later. The depth defines the crown and should consist most of both cartilage and fur. So faults would be lacking strong defined crown or lack of boldness, which is like the definition of Holland's is boldness. Crown not positioned just behind the ears, narrow side front, or view back of the crown. Faults severely for ear control. So ear control is something we can also discuss because it can turn into a disqualification, even though here it doesn't specifically say it in the Holland Lop. But if you go to the dictionary, it does fault horizontal ears for a lot of, they fault it severely here, but if you look at the dictionary, it will turn into a disqualification because it is a lop breed. I have gotten in arguments over judges who do not fault for horizontal ears, and that's because it's not written in the standard, but it is written in the general like Arba DQs. So for instance, if, just because it's not written here on the toes, if there's one that isn't the correct color, the rabbit still gets DQ'd. Split penis isn't mentioned, but it's still a DQ. Horizontal ears and lot breeds are just like that. So let's touch base on this situation. So we're going to start crown. The most important thing is the shape, the placement, and the boldness. And for the ears, the shape and the length. So in terms of thickness and well furring, it actually really correlates with bone. So if you have a rabbit with thin bone, you're going to have thin ears. You're going to have poorly furred ears. In terms of boldness, that has to do with fur density. So if you want well furred ears, you're going to need really heavy bone and dense fur, and that's going to translate into a good crown. So we're going to talk about the different, first, we're going to talk about the different shapes of the crown. So if this is the top of the head, and like here are the little eyes, right? We want the crown to be as round and as full as possible. It might even touch down to the shoulder, and that's good because that's full. Now if your crown sits here, your ears are going to sit here, and that is a massive width here. We would call this a narrowness because the crown needs to fill up this entire section. I know it's a cartoon drawing, so we're going to give a little bit of grace. I am technically an artist. I should be better at this. But if the crown sits like this on the head, the ear is going to be very wide open, and it's going to sit right by the little eye. Whereas if the crown sits further back, even just by like a hair, not by much, there's already a gap forming, and that gap determines ear control. So if we're talking about ears that, like if the rabbit's upset, like I have a lot of my rabbits do this, I'm actively working on this. If the rabbit is upset and the ears go back, that is because the crown is slipped. It can be a hair that the crown is slipped, but it is enough that the rabbit can determine that it can pull its own ears back. So, and then there's also the whole boldness situation. So if we have a crown that's well placed, but there is no visual crown, you're going to lose a lot of points. You need a crown that has that prominent ridge that they talk about, and it's going to add fullness, and it's going to round out the back of that skull. And the definition of Holland's is round and bold. So the rounder the better. In this case also, if the crown is more rounded, it will go further down on the shoulder, and it will fill it in. This is actually also where the shape of the jowls interacts a lot, because if the jowls are sharp and not rounded, it sits here, which will make the ears look wrong. You need very full jowls, and it will round it out so that when the ear sits, it sits right at the edge of the cheek. So if you accidentally have really square jowls or really like refined or lax boldness, the ears will never be able to reach the cheek, just because the cheek ends way too soon. This also happens if you elongate the face. So if the face isn't short, the ears are going to look slipped, even if the crown itself is not slipped. So if you're having issues of judges saying that your ears are slipped, but they're right by the eye, it's probably something to do with the muzzle, and you're going to need to fix that. The nice thing with heads is it usually takes up to like 3 generations max to genuinely fix it, which is why I've been putting it off for so long. So let's talk about when it's slipped this way, or in this case, tight crown. So crown going this way, this is slipped or correct placement. Crown going this way, like up and this way, is tight. So we want a crown to span all the way here, because then the ears sit right by the eye. But what happens if that crown is only here? The ears do this. And that's a problem, because now when the rabbit gets upset, the ears are going to start doing this. And that's no longer a lop. So if a rabbit gets DQ'd for ear control, check how tight that crown is. That crown needs to span all the way down to where the eyes are. See this massive gap here compared to this little gap. And obviously, again, it's just cartoon rabbits, but it gives a good idea. I could do realism, but then this hour would be way too long. The video would just go on and on and on. So if you have a rabbit that has a tight crown, and it sits like this, the ears are stuck up here. And if you loosen that hairband and you let those ears sit down, they will frame the face, and you will have a very pretty little rabbit. So that is the tightness. Now, if you have a tight crown that's also slipped, it's going to look awful, and it's going to look irredeemable, and I would frankly not bring that into your herd. tight crowns are really, really hard to fix. Of all the things to fix on the head, tight crowns and square muzzles are the two things that I avoid like the plague, because it just ruins the look of the animal. You can have a gorgeous animal, but the moment that crown is tight, from the side profile, we're left with this, and that doesn't look very good. Even if this ear is perfectly shaped, and that's also a problem when you get ears that are too short, they do not sit properly, and they need to be heavy and thick so that they lay properly on the head. So in terms of the crown, it's basically like a little cap the rabbit wears, and we want it to go as further up here as possible and as close to the shoulder as possible, and we want it finishing right by the eye socket. And the reason for this is going to dictate where your ears sit. So even though 10 points are given to ears and only 8 is given to the crown, if this is messed up, your 10-point worthy ears are going to look like garbage. So if the crown is only this narrow on the head compared to the rest of the head, like say this is the base of where the crown is, we're going to get folded ears. And folded ears look like this. And that is awful. And we see this the most on pet rabbits, and it spoils everything. Because if we are to open up and pull the crown forward, this ear, even if it's long, turns into this. And that looks a lot better. So if we properly place the crown on a rabbit, and we get a good base here, the ear is going to follow, and you're going to get that wide open base. And when you do that, when your ear is shaped like this and you open it up, it rounds out. So it changes the shape of the ear. So if you look at some rabbits and you see that little notch, that's because the crown is a little bit tighter, and obviously that's viewed from the ear turning like this. So if you want to get rid of this little wrinkle, you need to open up the crown more. And obviously it's just ear anatomy, so at a certain angle it will always be there. But if you want that nice, we call them spoon ear look, you're going to need to open up that crown. So by opening up the crown, we increase the opening of the ear, and that is super, super important. It gives the whole look of a Holland Lop to have these little round spoon ears, and that is dictated by the crown. Now, in the old standard, as in like 2018, we gave a finger length of grace between the ears and the eye. We gave a little bit of grace because even if the crown is placed perfectly, a rabbit can still pull its ears back. And that's okay. Ear control is when the ears go up and they stay up, or they go horizontal and they stay horizontal. They refuse to go down. Some rabbits, judges, good judges, will judge sitting in the coop instead of out on the table when it comes to ear and crown, and we prefer those judges. I'm not going to say any names, but there are also a lot of breeders who have tight crowns and they use it to hide the length of the ear. So if you have a little head and the crown only starts out here, so it's really, really tight, this long ear is going to look a lot shorter. So if the ear originally was like this, it's going to look like this, and it's going to look a lot more appealing. So now we're going to go on to ears. So shape is a big thing. I really struggle with shape currently. I have one line that does really good, but the goal is balance. So balance, the definition of balance, is it is as tall as it is wide. It is as deep as it is wide. That is depth. So depth is this one, and width is this one. So that is why everything when it comes to rabbits in general is circle based, because when something is as tall as it is wide, is deep, we get a perfect sphere, and that's going to translate into the shape of the ear. So for a well-shaped ear, we want something that is as wide and carries that width down as it is long. And obviously it's going to be this shape because we need it to reach the jowls. So in this case, if this rabbit was proportionate, the ear would go like this because it needs to reach here, or even just, we might even give it a little bit of grace here. But the longer the ear is, the wider it needs to be. And that's really, really difficult to work with. So we need to really make sure that the length is kept to a manageable amount. And the problem with this is when you get like into it too much, and people would rather reduce the length than deal with the width, you get these tiny pointed ears. So a fault is pointed ears. So pointed ears look like this, and they're very, very mildly rounded off, just a little bit. The problem that I got when I started with Eleanor, and she's known for her large ears, is her ears are pointed and long. which means they look really, really bad. So the goal is to bring in a more further up crown, because then it opens it up. So what I've been doing is I've been slowly dragging the crown forward and opening it up, and now shortening the ears. And ear length can be fixed within 1 or 2 generations. If you bring in good stock, I have fixed in one specific L&R line, I have fixed the ears with 1 generation, and it was one really, really good doe from Deb and Nicole from Brock's Fallen Ears that fixed. Like if you look at Charles and all of his beautiful babies, which we can go out into the barn real quick and look at those ears many generations later, they are fixed because of one doe I brought in. So if you're already struggling with ear length, do not bring in another long-eared doe, specifically does, because with bucks, you're going to need a little bit of length to, balance with the large head that a buck will achieve with age. Whereas with does, they cannot have that grace, because now you cannot show these juniors with junior heads. It just won't work. So you need to have does with balanced ears. And I use the word balanced because a brute doe is allowed to have big ears as long as she has a big body and she has a big head and it fits in. But the problem is if you continually use does like that, you're going to get long ears and you're going to get problems with crown placement. So the last thing, of course, here is boldness. And the boldness is basically just density. So the bolder the crown, the better for the ears usually are. So if you're struggling, like I have some, if you're struggling to determine if a kit is going to have a good bold crown, when that first junior coat molts in, look at the crown. And if it looks like butt cheeks, you're good to go. You're in the green. If when a kit is first getting, like a pre-junior is first getting that snip of fresh fur around the nose, and the crown is completely flat, there will be no boldness. That is just the reality of it. Now, some kits, you can tell from 3 weeks old, their ears are down, it looks great, it looks wonderful. Keep them. You can tell ear and crown placement and shape well before you can tell the body. So if you really want to fix this, you need to cull hard, you need to breed a lot, and you need to breed and choose young. And you can keep back everything. The body is harder to fix. If you fix the body first and then later address the head, you will go further faster. If you first fix the head and trash the body on your way there, you're never going to be able to get that back. So what I have spent the last 7 years on is the body. This last year I finally finished up width and bone length, and I'm very, very happy. But I never dropped mass, I never dropped balance, because the moment those 2 things are gone, the head is also ruined, the body is ruined, the boldness is gone. I can work on the body now in confidence, knowing that I can now come back this year for convention and work on the head, and I already started that, and I will show you the litter that I started that with. Okay, it is example rabbit time. We're going to start out with a couple bucks that all have different ears and crowns. I'm going to lock you guys up because you're pushing, one of which is in the middle of the mold, but he's a very important example. So this is the buck I brought in to fix ear and crown. So you see, I know he's black, it's a little hard, and we're by an airport, I'm so sorry for the noise. But his crown starts here, it ends right at the eye. His ear sits perfectly, it stops right at the cheek. No matter how he feels, his ear is stuck there. It is shaped beautifully. It is nice and round and open at the top. It could be a little bit more open. So his crown is perfectly placed. The placement of the crown is right by the eye. Now I just have to move it wider. So kind of stretch this part. So now we're going to get into husband, who has a really well-shaped crown, but a narrow-shaped ear because of the length, which is why he needs time. So you can see here, which I know he is molting, he's the molter, his crown goes from here to here. It's really well placed. His ear is right there, but the ear shape itself is just not as wide in the center as it should be to give the balance. So because of that, his ears look just a hair pointed. Now here is going to be my best shaped ears, but on a slipped crown. Not your turn yet, bud. This is Charles. He has the boldest, also in a mold. He has the boldest, best shaped ears, but because his crown is a hair slipped, he pulls them back. So when he is comfortable, Can I get you to pull your ears forward, bud? They can sit like this. But you see, he pulls them back just because of the slight slip. And this was my first generation fixing ears. The shape is perfect. The shape is beautiful. Not too pointed. He's as wide as he could be, but it's just a little bit slipped. Now next is the buck that is actively sneaking out, who needs time because of ear length. Now he's a sable point. I give grace to sable points because I have a ruby cast. But you can see how he just pulled his ear forward. It looks pretty darn good. Except for it's way too long for the jowls. So where my finger here is, where the jowls end, and I get at least a finger length of too much length on him. If I really mess with him and I kind of treat him, you can now see the gap between the ears and the eyes, and that is because it is a little bit slipped. So, now let's look at some kits. And what I see promising in these kits. So this is actually a baby from Charles, bred to a doe with a perfectly placed crown. We're working on body primarily, but I refuse to keep a buck from Charles that does not have his ear shape. So this is a baby, and you can already tell the ears sit exactly where they want. The crown ends right here. The ears are round, they are open behind all this fur. They are open and they are rounded at the tips. They are well furred and they are thick. And if you're worried about the thickness, flip them over, look at the feet, see how wide the bone is and how short the bone is. That promises me thick ears when that testosterone also kicks in. But he is very promising. His ears fell at 3 weeks, and he is 6, so he's a little bit of an ugly age, but you can see that crown ends here, meaning the ears are perfectly parallel with the face. Because if the crown was tight, the ears would be up here, and then the ears would look more like this, or even potentially like this when he's discomfort. I have some examples of a tighter crown. This doe is actually branded, and she has a greatly placed crown, but they are tight, and you can see that in the side, because the crown ends here instead of down here. And if the crown ended down there, it would pull the ears out. Don't want to pull too hard on you. But her crown is tight, and therefore the ears start up here instead of down here, and that leads to this look. Now, from the side, it looks pretty good. And that is because it is compensating for this length that we have right here. About 2 fingers worth of length. It ends right at the jowls. If the crown was correctly placed in terms of where the ears go this way, in terms of the tightness, the ears would look long on her. Crown boldness, crown placement. You will see a theme. My does have the shorter, better crown. She also has a slightly tight crown. I will let her relax. Now, I also give her ear control grace because she is a very tense doe. But you can see her boldness is great. That very visible crease. She's also starting a molt, so we're going to give her some grace. Her ears are placed right by the face. And these does are what compensate for my bucks. So that's why some judges will, when they hold the head, they will hold the ears down. Because some does, like this one, who are very sassy, refuse to drop their ears. You can see how bold and how clean, hi baby girl, that crown is. So, hopefully that was helpful. If you have any questions or if I missed anything, drop it below. I know this is a long video, hi baby girl, but this is an important subject for a rabbit that has so many points sitting on the top of their head. And it dictates so much about the ears as well, and it dictates so much about the overall look. So if you look at any rabbit that has won and has done really, really well, you will notice the crown is perfect, or at least pretty darn close to it. Now we do give grace for pulling back for attitude. Certain judges, they'll whistle, they'll kiss, they'll judge while they're in the coop. I actually have coops here so that I can see them without having to worry about getting over that urine guard. visually. So we do give a lot of grace. A bad judge will never give this rabbit grace, which it is written in the standard that there is a certain amount of grace that we allot them, and there's certain ways we judge them. I believe in the actual Holland Lop Rabbit Specialty Guidebook, it talks about judging while they're in the cage, not when you pull them out. And the problem with this is it does give a lot of grace to slipped crowns that are pulled forward due to curiosity, but it also gives a lot of grace for ear control, and sometimes that is needed, because sometimes there's a tight crown, and sometimes it's just an attitude problem. Speaking of, she's escaped. She will say goodbye. Say goodbye, Dancing Queen.